Tara, welcome to Get Shit Done.
Hello, Alex. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited she's here. Also, I pressed record at 11:11 Mexico City time. I'm really into angel numbers. So I'm like,
Love it.
yes, this is going to be a great interview. I already feel it. And to get started, I always like to do a check-in with our guests. So on a scale from 1 to 10, if you could think about how you're feeling right now in the business, 10 being the highest, what would you rate your vibration right now, your energy?
6.527.
Oh my God, are you a former engineer?
No.
I love this. So we have a like in our community, we have quite a bit of female engineers and they are always very precise and I love it. So tell us why 6.257?
Well, our website, we're in the midst of launching a new website, and it feels a little bit like whack-a-mole. Like the program will fix one thing and something else will pop up. And I'm a bit of a control freak, but not really. But this is something I just can't control. And so I'm finding it very difficult because I just want to get it done, and it's just taking longer. And you sort of you get there, and you're like, okay, this is going to be awesome. And then you look, and you're like, why is this not working over here? And it's just been a process because it's 100% custom website. Just because of the things that we're trying to accomplish, there was just nothing off the shelf to do that, and so it's complicated. And
Yep.
I want it done. So that's why I'm not a 10 or a 9, 10, because it's been a bit of a road. But nothing worthwhile is ever easy.
Absolutely. And I love doing these check-ins because it's so easy. I stopped doing this in, the beginning of the pandemic where everyone's like, how are you doing? Everyone's like, fine, or I'm great. And it's like, but are you? And it just humanizes. Like, you're not going to have a 10 day all the time. There's just no way. Like, probably 2 days ago, I would have said I was at a three. And today, I would say I'm probably at an eight. But it's so fascinating. My first that you mentioned this because my first two companies were in the tech space and fashion tech. So I would always say to one of my last co-founder and CTO, he was like, "We're gonna get this done by in 1 month." So I'm like, "Oh, so two or three, two or three."
Right?
There's bugs. There's all
Right?
the things.
Uh,
Had to learn
yes,
that the hard
yes.
way. So I feel your pain, especially when it's custom, because we had to have a custom platform because while we sold premium denim, it was all tailored. So like we had to be able to have people put measurements and so everything had to be custom. And when I tell you product development was a pain, it is a pain. So I feel your pain. I
Thank
feel
you.
your pain.
I've just gone up to a 7 now. I feel better because I've got kindred spirit right here.
Amen. We love it. We love it. Okay, so hopefully by the end of this we'll get you at least to an eight. So love
Yeah.
this. So I always love to take it back and give a little context because, in the age of social media, it's so easy to compare ourselves to people's stories and, they'll hear about all the amazing things you've done, but also I think each of us is in a unique position because of our unique experiences. So I want to take it back to little Tara. Did you always want to be an entrepreneur or grow businesses when you were a kid? What did that look like? What did little Tara actually want to do?
Ooh, little Tara, you should ask my mother. She'd have a way better insight into this. She always said that I was the youngest for a reason. She couldn't do more after me because I just looked at the world a little differently. It's hilarious. She went to parent teachers one time, and all the artwork was all around the walls in elementary school in this particular time that she went. And the class assignment had been draw a picture of the person sitting in front of you. And so mom is going around and she's looking and she's like, there's Sally and with her pigtails and there's, Bob and she goes, and then I get to one picture and it's the back of somebody's head. And she said, that's got to be Tara.
I
I was
love
the
it.
only one. Draw the picture of the person in front of you. That's what I saw. So I drew the back of her head. I didn't draw the picture of her
So literal.
face,
I love this.
which was just, I just looked at things differently than other people. And that's what my mother always said. My father carried around, and I didn't understand it, but my father carried around this thing in his wallet for years. And I laughed when I sort of got old enough to understand it. But I had done a lemonade stand when I was a kid, and the sign on it was topless lemonades. I didn't even know what that meant.
That's awesome.
But I thought it was good for sales because somewhere I'd picked that up.
This is what I love about kids. So my two favorite groups to get advice from, people over 60, people under 5. Because kids are just the way they see the world is as pure as possible. The older they get, obviously they get more socialized, but they will just say what it is and in their very literal way for how they perceive the world. I feel like a kindred spirit. I'm also a youngest child. And when you said you should ask my mother, I started almost laughing because I started thinking about my mom. When I was younger, people would go to my mom or actually go to me, and my mom would be standing next to me and they're like, "Oh, little girl, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And I'm like, "I'm going to rule the world." And my mom is like, "I understand what she means, but they're going to think she's crazy." You know? And as a kid, my version of ruling the world is I actually saw it as like, how can I serve people? Um, but I love that story. So when you think about, before you started this venture, what were you doing professionally? Did you become an artist? Were you continue sketching the back of people's heads, or what did that look like?
Yeah, definitely not. No, definitely not. Um, oh geez, I've been at this for so long. Like my father was an entrepreneur, so he sort of constantly planted seeds. Like just when I was in university, before I went to university, he was sort of like, don't make other people rich, do it for yourself, was kind of his attitude. And so, but I was like, I don't know what I want to do. Like, I don't know what the thing is, and I don't. So it was always, entrepreneurship was always in the back of my mind, but I didn't know what the thing was ever going to be. And my father was an inventor. I was no inventor. I was not going to invent the next best whatever. And so I just had a really hard time sort of figuring out what it was going to be. And it took me about 30 years. And I think that what I finally realized is it's not what, it's how. And when that happened, then and also, so there's that, and then also life. My father was an entrepreneur, and I saw the toll it takes on families, and I saw the amount of work it took and the stress. And he went bankrupt when I was 10, and so I also felt really strongly that I don't need to be in a rush on this. Like he went bankrupt when he was 52 and woke up the next day and started again. He didn't have me till he was 42. He was in the Second World War. Like he got shit done later in life. And that was
Yeah.
okay too. So I didn't feel an urgency. I just felt that when I do it, I'm going to do it.
I love that because I even think about I have nieces and nephews and one of them's about to go to college. And I always think about, if I didn't have the pressure of, okay, once you get out of high school, you have to do this and do this or whatever, have it figured out. I even think back now and I'm like, you're asking people that aren't even 20 years old yet to know what they want to do for the rest of their lives. Like, what do you want to study in college? It's like, just go do something that's interesting to you and then you'll figure it out. Like, I was a sociology major. It translates because if you understand people, you understand business. But I was like, that's just interesting to me. And I loved what you said about it's not just the what, it's the how, because that's why we do this podcast. It's that I love hearing the stories of people's successes, but then you sit back and you're like, how the hell did you do that? So, how did you get there? So, in those 30 years before you got to Ethical Swag, so what was it that you experimented with at the time?
Wow. How long is this podcast?
I love it.
How much time do we
How much time do we have?
have? So, it's interesting because when I graduated from university, my husband and I moved out to Vancouver, British Columbia, and I had never been there and I didn't know a soul. So, fresh out of university, no experience, didn't know anybody, new city, And I was fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. And I think I said the right thing at the right time. Anyway, I got hired by the owner of the Vancouver Canucks, and he had a vision to build the first privately funded arena for his team. And that started me on a journey of what I would call startups, but they were multi-million dollar startups. It was literally
Professional teams. Yeah.
it was translating a vision into reality. And so, very early in my 20s, there I was negotiating multi-million dollar deals with General Motors and IBM, and being involved in this sort of visionary sort of idea to I co-wrote the bid for the first international expansion for the NBA to come into Vancouver. And then I started my family, and so resigned from that, not because I didn't love it, not because I didn't love all the people I was working with, but I didn't see how they could coexist because the entertainment industry and families were really difficult. I could see that it was a difficult thing to manage. And right on the heels of me resigning, the owner of the Canucks actually was the first chairman, had the idea of the Olympics for Vancouver. And so I got the call saying, hey, we're thinking about going after the Olympics. The owner of the Canucks suggested we give you a call because I had sort of been with him through a lot of this stuff. And I was like, no, sorry, got a family. I know what that's going to take. And I was able to carve out. They said, well, what would you do? How could we entice you to come? And this is back in the 90s. There was not the internet like it was. There was not, we were still faxing things. I didn't have a cell phone. And they said, well, what could we do? And I sort of carved out how I could get involved, and based on my terms. And they said, okay. And so I was involved in the development of the domestic bid for the 2010 Winter Olympic Games, which ultimately we all know happened. So that's a long way of saying I kind of was in the startup space, even though it wasn't me. And I was very much, very early in my career, realized if we set our minds to stuff, we can change a lot. Like the ideas around going after the Olympics wasn't let's go after the Olympics. It was we need better infrastructure for transportation because Vancouver's growing so much. We need a better highway up to Whistler. We need the international spotlight on us again from a tourism standpoint because we had Expo 86 and then we didn't have. So these are the problems we have. What's the solution? And the solution was 2010 Olympic Winter Games. And so I also very early on in my career was working with inspirational people that allowed me to really see, right, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And the solution is likely not something you've even thought about
Mm.
necessarily yet.
Yep.
And I think that really rooted me very early on nothing's impossible. Um, if you can dream it, you can do it. I was so fortunate to be surrounded by amazingly talented people, that have gone on to do some pretty amazing things. So I was just very lucky, and I think it rooted the combination of my father being an entrepreneur, that, and then I literally was informed over a 30-year career of I want a bit of that, not that. It was almost like building a recipe. Like, I was looking to figure out what were the ingredients that I was interested in including in my, you know, chocolate chip muffins. And over 30 years, it was like, that's where the best, ingredients are. And I don't like that. Yeah, that might be the easy way to do it. But it actually, you sacrifice taste or you sacrifice whatever, and so I just, through my career, I think that's a good idea. Ooh, I never want to do that. Ooh, I don't like that. Ooh, that's pretty toxic.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really good. And I literally kind of did that, and I just kept building up my jar,
Yeah.
and I that's kind of how it all. That's the journey. And then I,
I
I
love
figured out
this.
there was like five things that I was like, I didn't know what the business was going to be, but I started to write down what it had to look like. And
Mm.
it's like, it has to align with my values. I need a global market. I need to be able to use my skills. Like it was, I had those things written down very clearly.
Yep.
And then when the time was right and the stars aligned, and, you know, that's a whole nother story. That's when I kind of went, okay, it's going to be ethical swag, but it doesn't actually matter what it is.
Ooh, I love this. A couple things came up for me as you've been talking is that the first is this is why context really matters because I'll meet entrepreneurs that are like, we have the best idea ever. And I'm like, ideas are cheap. And you haven't really, something like this has been thought of before. It's really about how you execute. And to your point around, it was around the solution, and it's usually not what you think. And that's why you can get multiple people that are looking at the same problem with different solutions. That's why I'm like, there's enough space at the table for multiple perspectives, multiple types of businesses to try to solve something because the way we approach it is all going to be different. That's when we try to follow a playbook bit by bit from someone else, we actually kind of dishonor and disown our own experiences that allow us to think about it in a very unique way. And I also love that you talked about like the how. And so you already started hinting at this. And I love that you had this career of being in kind of a scale up before ethical swag. So I would love, because we're going to get into your how, but I would love to now transition to how did you even start conceptualizing ethical swag, and why was this an important problem for you to solve?
So the idea actually came to me back. I incorporated ethical swag in 2010, but I kept my corporate handcuffs, my golden handcuffs, corporate job until much later. But
Very smart. Very smart.
so I came up with the idea because I was actually in a presentation with the head of a community college that was talking about a new campus that they were building, and the geothermal and the carbon offsets and the LEED certification and all the things they were doing around sustainability. And then coincidentally, about 3 weeks later, I went in, I was invited into one of their business classes in one of their community college campuses to do something with their business class. And my parting gift was a portfolio that in no way reflected the values that I'd heard about 3 weeks prior from their leader. And I was like, wow, what a lost opportunity. They're spending tens of millions of dollars on a new building. And yet the product that has their logo doesn't reflect their values or what they stand for. And I probably, I don't know that I consciously made the connection at the time, but I'm sure I pulled on my prior experience working in sponsorship and in professional sports. And the reason why the General Motors and the IBMs and a lot of these big global corporates gave us tens of millions of dollars is because they wanted to do brand association. They wanted to get the positive that we had associated with their brand. And I'm like, oh, swag is a far more economical way for companies to get to make their values visible. And yet that was a perspective that the industry had become almost cheapened. Like you hear trinkets and trash and that sort of thing. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Here's an opportunity for organizations to make their values visible on what products bear their logo. And that's where the
Mm,
idea came from.
I love this. So you said that was in 2010. You still had your corporate job, which shout out to the women in our community. I think again, all these narratives around what successful entrepreneurship looks like. If you don't have an institutional investor, which most entrepreneurs do not out the gate, you are your investor. And having a job is a great way to make sure you have health insurance, you got a steady paycheck while you're building this thing up. So, as you're getting started, one of my favorite things to ask people, and I'm sure you've heard of, do things that don't scale. And I think that's very true. Like you have to kind of experiment early on and actually throughout your journey as you're continuing to evolve the company to figure out, okay, what is it that we can do just to get some clients or money in the door that might not be scalable, but it was a huge unlock to your growth? So, whether that was when you got started or maybe even what you still do today, what are some of the things you've done in the business that are not scalable, but they have been really integral to the growth of the business?
Well, interestingly enough, I came up with the idea of ethical swag sort of on a gut feel. And I thought, woohoo, this is, golden. And the few people that I spoke to didn't get it back in 2010. And I was like, I don't want to sell swag. And so I put up a website and kind of left it there, spoke to the CEO of where I was working and said, I'm not going to do anything with this. I don't want people to think that I'm using this position to try and fuel that position. It's just going to sit there. And then every so often orders would come in from like Yale University and from like some really high brand names. And I'm like, well, this is interesting because the handful of people I actually reached out to and said, are you interested? People that I thought were my target audience kind of got a glazed look. So then I kind of parked it. And then all of a sudden, people were finding ethical swag. And so ironically, I had 3 kids with braces. I kept the health plan. I kept all those things. And once my kids got a little older, I still didn't know that it was going to be ethical swag, honestly, because I kind of didn't want to sell swag. I'm not going to lie. Like I didn't know that that was going to be what it was. That took a little while to sort of settle and me go all in and say, yes, I now see what the vision is. But I did research for the first time after I'd had sort of this website. The website was like an online brochure, like it was nothing. It was quite interesting, like there was nothing to it. But we had sales to some pretty prominent organizations. So I picked up the phone really old school and said, how'd you find us and why'd you buy from us? Us, me. And
The
that's
royal us,
where,
the royal we.
yeah. And oh my goodness, that was the wow, okay. My gut was right. There's a huge market opportunity here, but my presumptions around who my target audience is different. And how I'm going to build the business model is different than what I thought. And how I'm going to go about it is different than what I thought. So my gut was right that there was a market gap. But until I actually rolled up my sleeves and made some phone calls and then did primary and secondary research 7 years later, that's when I went, okay, now I see it. But it was I would have never got the URL ethicalswag.com, honestly. Like if I had awaited, like it's just a phenomenal name.
Oh my
And
God, yeah.
right, it's the Kleenex of swag, of sustainable swag.
It's amazing. I love what you said here because when we look at, I mean, we've now interviewed over 100 women on this show who have all successfully scaled, and there's 5 core components that people do consistently that everyone has in common. One of those things is customer feedback. Because I think it's so easy for people to go out and try to build things, but are you building in a way that is solving a problem for a particular group? And I love saying niche is sexy. Everyone is like, we're going to serve this really wide group, 25 to 34, and they live in, metropolitan cities. I'm like, tell me more. What more about this person? Because that's still really big. It's going to take you time to really build up. You need to target your hell yes customers, which we call them. In those conversations, what did you learn? Because you said, oh, what we're doing was fine, but how we're going about it was a little different. What did it uncover for you in terms of, who you were actually targeting versus who you thought, and also how you were going to build the business? What did those conversations unlock for you?
It was massive. Honestly, it was massive. So, when I first had the idea, I've been in business for a long time. I have a really solid network. So I went to the top. And what I found in my research is I needed to do more of a grassroots approach. That was the aha. Swag largely is purchased by office managers, marketing directors, The CEO does not get involved in where do we source where we buy our notebooks and water bottles, unless you're Patagonia or something,
Yeah.
right? So that's what that unlocked for me was
Mm,
okay, I need to meet my customer where they are. So in the research, there was two primary objections to sustainable swag. One of them was the products are too expensive. The second one was when I've tried it, the products are kind of crappy. So those were the primary objections. So I really looked at that and said, okay, so how are we going to solve for those things? And the solution, from my perspective, was we need to meet our customers where they are. And so we have it's very simple. We came up with the emoji rating system, good, better, best. And it's one smiley emoji is good, two smiley emojis is better, and three smiley emojis is best. So if you're just in the budget category of good, just know that we have a base level around social compliance, environmental stewardship, product quality, product safety, and supply chain security that that good product meets. Then when and if your budget or your project allows, we've got better and then best. So that was one of the ways that we addressed some of the objections in the primary research. So
yeah.
grassroots and meet our customers where they are, and design a way to do it easily. So that's why we're so tech focused. Like we're very heavily in tech, but we're very human centered. So the technology enables our human interactions. And so on our website, you can sort by women owned business. You can sort by B Corps. You can sort by organic, or you can sort by recycled. You get like our filters are very specific to the kinds of things that our customers are looking to be able to filter for.
I love this. And another key thing you're bringing up that we've heard a lot of guests on here say, and again, OGs, you know, I call these things out because why reinvent the wheel when it is working, is a lot of grassroots guerrilla marketing, grassroots relationships. And what that's one of the biggest things, like sales, a lot of it has to do with relationships. And so talking to people, you even said, I already had a network and I went to that network. I love that you started there and you're listening to what their needs are. I think that is super super important. And then from there you start going into, okay, this is what we need to shift into. I'm curious though, because you got feedback from your audience around ethical. I think of it when you started talking about it, I was thinking of like vegan and gluten-free baked goods, where I'm like, oh, there's this perception like no good flavor, it's gonna be whatever. And expensive. So I can only imagine with swag that it's like, oh, the product's not that great and it's great for the environment, but like I still want good quality. So can you walk us through the tactical things you did? Because I think sustainability and ethical, all of that has grown, but I think there's still this idea of it's associated just with charity or it's associated with social impact and not necessarily business. How were you able to scale tactically and say, no, actually, this can be high quality, this can do great things, and it can still boost our bottom line? So, what were some of the things that you all were able to do with the business that maintained that integrity and allowed you to attract an audience to grow?
Well, see, I think that that's really at the core reason why I started Ethical Swag, to be honest. So I, over my career, have watched how it's gotten harder and harder to afford a house, how a handful of people are getting richer and richer, how people are not welcomed into the workforce, and like I experienced it when I started. I literally had a woman, my boss at the time, say, "Why are you wearing pants in front of the CEO of our company?" Can you imagine that?
Wow. Because I love pants.
No, you know what I said? I said, "Oh, he's wearing pants too. Maybe ask him why he's wearing pants." And I walked away.
Love that. Love that.
But like I lived it. I worked in it. And for me, ethical swag is why I'm doing it. And so we've baked in all of those things into everything that we do. Okay. So it's the social, it's the environmental, it's how do we our governance, right? How do we show up at work? A few things that I learned, like back with that experience. I'd be on the playground with my daughter and other people, and they were like, "Wow, you're doing really interesting work. How did you do that?" And I was literally standing there with lawyers, accountants, like really, really smart people that had chosen to stay with their families rather than continue with their careers. They had sort of a choice to make. And they're like, how have you been able to carve out a little bit of both? And so that was one of the things that I put in the jar to remember. It's like, how do we create meaningful work for people when they on their terms? It's so, a very good friend of mine who's a chartered accountant was a bookkeeper for the Y while her kids were younger. Fabulous for the Y because they had a very qualified person doing their books, but her career didn't have any growth trajectory at that time because she was making choices that were
Mm,
sort of favoring her family. And it's like, why have we defined work in those ways? So those are some of the things that I was really focused on in the development of ethical swag. And when you talk about ethical and how do you define it, if you ask 10 people, it would be 10 different
yeah.
10 different definitions. So before I even started, I was like, okay, how do we define ethical? Let's be super transparent. Are we perfect? No. Let's start where we are and get better over time. Let's not try and make it perfect out of the gates.
Yeah.
Progress over perfection. So, what does ethical mean to us? We're very transparent about exactly what that is. And then we make decisions on it because we have a very clear sort of purpose and mission.
Yeah. And it sounds like this works internally and externally. So, from that, what would you say from how you all define ethical? What was it that you think attracted the loyalty of your audience? So, the people who shop from you, because now today there's a ton of ethical things out there. You have the OGs in the space like a Patagonia or an Eileen Fisher or whatever, but now there's way more that's opening up, especially since 2010, right? So what would you say your customer values when they come to ethical swag? What makes them loyal to you?
I think they come because of what we stand for, and they stay because of the customer service and the people behind it and that sort of thing. So I think it's a combination, to be honest. We do stand out within the market when folks are looking for alternate choices. And the reason I think that we do stand out is a combination of we have a really great name.
That's huge.
And yeah, right. I guess it would probably be the equivalent of getting the right street corner if you were a restaurant or a bar, right? But people stay because the food is good and the drinks are good.
Yes. Yes, it's like that really amazing restaurant. And you're like, this sucks. You all are like, no, the exterior is great and the interior experience is going to be amazing.
Exactly, exactly. So I think it's a combination of that, but I think that that comes from how we are internally and how, I've said this before in a couple of other podcasts, but one of my proudest moments was one of my customer experience team. They had received an email and a client wasn't happy, and we don't always get it right. Like that's sort of the way it works. And they said, "We're really sorry. We'll make this right, but we won't tolerate being spoken to like that." And
Period.
that employee was empowered to say that because they just know fundamentally that's how we work.
I love this because I think there's this idea in business, there's all this like blanketed advice, like the customer's always right. And I'm like, actually, no, they're not always right. And it's like any relationship, you need to have communication, you need to have trust, you need to be kind to each other. So I'm like, I will fire a customer. Maybe we messed up on something, but that does not justify any bad behavior or inappropriate just maliceness towards people. So I love that and it sounds like you created this like internally, and it's kind of like humans, right? How you feel about yourself and how your values internally kind of emanate out and attract what you want to attract from the external. So I love that you were able to do that for your team and then attract kind of the tribe that, helped to grow the business. And so that kind of leads me to you have this really strong values-based business and you were able to grow it without a marketing team, without a sales team, without huge digital ads. What were some of the key strategies and tactics you all did to drive growth if you don't have those components?
For sure. And we don't have a relationship with our clients, right? We're a remote first
Yeah.
company. We're a
Yeah.
remote first company because I made that decision because I wanted to hire for talent, not location, to address that whole school ground or park episode when I was doing the Olympic bid, right? So, how do we create employment opportunities, meaningful work for folks? And we do that by doing it on their own terms. So, every decision I made was technology based that was going to allow people to be able to do it from a laptop anywhere. So, we were long before COVID remote first. Because it was one of our core principles, one of the core pieces. And then when I looked at the market, I said, okay, like we can't develop personal relationships because that's what salespeople are for. And this industry is traditionally built on commission-based sales. And I was like, how am I going to do that? Well, at the foundation of that, it's about trust, right? That's what relationships are built on. So I'm like, how do we um, demonstrate trust? Because that's an emotion. That is something you feel. It's not something you can just say, hey, trust us. If someone says, trust me, I got to run in the other direction. That's a little bit more scary, right?
Yeah.
It's not what you say, it's what
Show
you do
me.
that matters.
Hmm.
And so that was a problem for me that I needed to solve. Like just about everything in your business. You're looking at it and saying, okay, well, how do we don't have relationships. We're remote first. Trust is at an all-time low, globally because of fake news and bogus reviews and people not trusting where things are coming from. How do we address that problem? And my solution to that problem was certified B Corp,
Mm.
third party audit that you can't buy,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So that's just one example of, I literally broke down all the pieces for our business to say, okay, I know who my customer is. I know what they want. Now, how do we create an environment where they know that they can trust us and that we are doing what we say we are doing?
Yeah. Because it's easy to throw around words like ethical and sustainable to your point, but it's like, are you? Are you?
There's a lot of greenwashing,
There's a ton.
right? So how do you address that? And so that was how I decided to address it was, B Labs is a globally recognized third party that does very deep audits around governance, around environment, around workers, around community. And they lifted the hood and took a look at the engine and they're able to say, yes, these guys are doing what they say they're doing. And so to me, that was the solution to that. And that's how I addressed it. So that's one example of some of the things that we did. We got really clear on what we did and what we didn't do. We got really clear on who our customer was and who our customer wasn't. We are not on a race to the bottom to get your cheapest pen.
Yeah.
We are, if you want quality, if you're going to put your logo on something, think about what that represents. And if you want the cheapest pen, we are just not your people. If you want a choice of a handful of pens that have a certain level of quality that that have not been built with child labor, that have other attributes, then we're probably your person. And we also look at it like less is more. Like somehow this industry is like just get tons and give it away. And we're looking at that very differently and saying, no, how can we be really purposeful about how we use swag as well? Because it's the reason why swag exists. It's an exceptionally powerful marketing medium.
Yeah. Yep.
But somehow we got a little lost in the industry over time and sort of lowered the perceived value, because some of the stuff is complete junk. And so we just don't. And so we were working with Advertising Week a couple of years ago in New York. They called us. We said, if you're looking for free stuff, we're not interested. And they said, no, no, we're really focused on sustainability. And we were like, great, because everybody wants free stuff. Like, we don't do that, but we're not going to have a profitable business if we give everything away. And I said, but you guys do have a platform of marketers and you care about sustainability. How can we work together to find a way for you to really demonstrate what you stand for? And so we put a program in place, and we had I sat on a panel talking about storytelling and sustainability with HP and the Jane Goodall Institute, who's a client of ours. And we just talked about how you could use swag in powerful ways to tell your story.
Mm, I love this. You know what I love about what you're saying is you remind me of Juleka, another amazing queen that episode we're putting out soon. And she talks about her growth being organic too. It sounds like a lot of what you all did from a strategic perspective is we have these values. So the people looking for that are going to come, like even the ad week thing, that was inbound, people coming to you. And what you all did is not just say we're another option. You actually are, sounds like, establish yourself as an authority. Like, we're an authority in this space because we have these are our values. This is what we will do and what we won't do. And so the people that are looking for that, oh, that's going to be really important. They want to align with that. So they're seeking you out. Is there any other things outside of we're a B Corp and we're organically attracting these amazing opportunities? Are there other things that you all are doing as well from customer acquisition that you feel like, oh, this is in our wheelhouse, this is what we do really well? Or is it just mainly organic?
So it has traditionally just mainly been organic,
I love that.
honestly. We experienced exceptional growth in 2022, and we're just lucky that we survived that, honestly, because we didn't have the foundation for the kind of growth that we experienced in 2022. We were shipping product, we hadn't collected money, we were like flying by the seat of our pants. Thank goodness all of our clients were ethical and they all paid, because we had a pretty big aging accounts receivable at one stage, because we just didn't have the systems to get everything talking to each other. It's a complex industry, right? We're decorating every single product and shipping it out, and our supply chain is complex and that sort of thing. So following that year, like if one person called in sick, it was, uh-oh.
Oh no.
It, like, we were stretched that much. So
Wow.
the last couple of years, we've really invested in the foundation, and we've really invested in technology and the people, and sort of building the systems for scale.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to, well, I won't lose why we are in business, like that purpose piece, um, in order to scale.
Yeah. So then what was happening in 2022? Because it sounds like, and this is, I love companies like this. You grow organically and then you reach this inflection point where it's kind of like, oh, kind of that tipping point, like, oh, this has really resonated with the market. And now we have enough momentum where actually it's starting to break our systems a little bit. And now to get to the next point of scale, we need to invest. So what happened? What was the context of 2022 where you were getting all this inbound?
So we've looked at that quite a bit. We'd love. I wish I had a perfect answer for it, honestly. But I launched I sort of look at everything from okay, let's prove that there's a market there. What's our MVP? So we did our MVP website in 2018. I launched it March 1st, 2018. That's when I decided, okay, this is going to be putting food on the table. No more golden handcuffs. I've done my research. I've identified what I'm going to do. And in March of 2018. I was all by myself. It was just me.
Eight
And
years. That was 8 years later. Amazing.
um, well, no, yeah, it was 8 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
from when I founded it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So in 2018, I put out our MVP website, and it was literally an MVP website. Like, there was no data, there was no anything. It was just like, let's see if the market likes it. And it was easy relatively from a revenue standpoint, because I was only feeding myself at that stage, right? Then by the end of 2018, I was like, okay, we got something here, right? So I hired my first employee. She's been with us now for 6 years. She just celebrated 6 years last month. So 2019, two of us didn't know what we didn't know. We were just like kind of trying everything and we were doing our thing and everything else. And we were like really starting to get traction, really growing the pipeline. Everything was looking really good for 2020. And then we all know what happened in 2020,
Ugh.
right? So pipeline super strong, starting to really figure it out. It was still only two of us. And then 2020 happened. And I looked at that as an opportunity, not uh-oh, I'm gonna retract and see what the world does. I'm like, I know the world wants this. We're gonna double down while, every event on the planet is canceled and while people aren't in their offices, and we're just gonna double down. And that's what we did. So we had enough data at that point. When I was starting in 2018, I didn't know anything. And I didn't have any data and I didn't have any customers and I didn't like I did that little bit of research, but like not enough to really inform me on really what does this look like. But when 2020 hit, it was like, okay, now we have enough data, now we have enough intel. Let's let's really roll up our sleeves. And so we got super busy for the latter part of 2020, just putting pieces in place. We were already remote first, so that wasn't an issue. Our B Corp landed, like that's a long process, but it landed in May of 2020. So now we've got our B Corp. We're already remote first. We've got our technology. We just have no customers. So, but the latter part of 2020 and then into 2021, we just went right in. And I hired people because there was incentives during COVID that we could take advantage of because the government was sort of like, oh, we got to help people, we got to help small business. And so every opportunity I could get, I grabbed and built. And the result of that was 2022. I think it was,
Mm,
and geez, like awareness of sustainability. People
yeah.
were sitting at home and seeing the impacts of stopping and seeing fish swimming through Venice and
Mm,
seeing, that we can actually fix things. I think people feel powerless sometimes when it comes to sustainability and having an impact and how one small decision really it doesn't make a difference. But then I think during COVID, people kind of looked and went, wow, we actually do have the power to change this. We do have power to vote with our dollars. We can, through the simple choice of where we buy things, have an impact on societies, on communities, and on the environment. I think there was sort of a something that clicked during COVID that was very
mm,
much where we already were.
mm,
And
yeah.
then people came. So
Yeah.
timing was good for us in a way.
That's what I was gonna say. Timing is absolutely everything, and this is why you can't always compare yourselves because I see all these companies that are like, we're gonna be the next Uber or the next this, and I'm like, you can't recreate the timing or the context of that moment.